is Dr. Suzanne O'Connor. I am a neuropsychologist at Rehab Without Walls, and I'm doing the presentation today to actually give a few helpful hints to families and caregivers for survivors who also have issues with substance abuse. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just an overview of a few things that I'd like to actually introduce you today will be actually where to find resources and how to educate yourselves a little bit better. Understanding the difference between enabling and empowering your loved one, and being able to identify and understand the different levels of support that you might need and that they might need. Okay? So first, I want to address usually the elephant in the room, and that is the first question that almost every family member asks me is, how do I get my family member help? Which usually leads me to ask you more questions, and that usually starts with something like, what is it exactly that you feel like that your loved one or the survivor is addicted to, and where is that individual at in their process about wanting to get help? So let me talk just a little bit about that before we get into some more helpful hints for you. And I want to introduce the idea of stages of change. This was developed by researchers Proshka and DiClemente in the early 1980s, and I'm going to show you the model here. The model really begins in what they call a pre-contemplation stage. And what that is that's probably before there's even insight or awareness that there's really any type of a problem at all. Now, whether that's drugs or alcohol or some kind of behavioral addiction like gambling, they're not really thinking about the issue being a problem. Then it moves into a more contemplation stage. And that's kind of the individuals getting a little bit of an inkling that they might be having some problems that need to be addressed, but they're not quite ready to do it yet. The next stage is called preparation, and that is when an individual is considering, I think I may have a problem with my particular addiction, and I'm wondering what I need to do or who I need to call in order to get some help. Let's say for cigarette smoking, it may be thinking about choosing, should I try something like Chantix or Wellbutrin for a medication? Should I try Nicorette gum as another type of solution? The next stage is for action, and that is when someone is actively engaging or seeking engagement in therapies or a 12-step program or some type of an intervention to help themselves, okay? Finally, there is a maintenance stage or sometimes relapse. With the maintenance stage, the individual is no longer in need to actively engage with an intervention, but they do need to maintain that level of sobriety. There's kind of a difference between being in recovery and being sober. And this is kind of maintaining your recovery and also probably maintaining better coping strategies, healthier coping strategies, or perhaps, again, as I said before, the individual may relapse back into old habits. Now, despite having slides that will show you that these things, one leads to the other, these stages may be more fluid and they may kind of go back and forth and be unsure. But what does that mean for you, the caregiver or the family member? Well, let me say to you that if you feel like that your loved one is in more of a pre-contemplative or a contemplative stage, you may not want to be very direct with charging in and saying you need help, because it really puts the person on the defense, especially if they do not realize that they have any difficulties yet, or they're not really buying into the fact that there's an addiction. The last thing you want to do is really to make the person defensive. In this case, if you want to move forward, you may look for help from an interventionist. You may enlist the help of friends and family to actually confront and build awareness with the individual. But again, I would encourage you to do it from a group standpoint, especially with the help of a preventional interventionist if you can. If the individual is more towards a kind of a preparation or an active action stage, they're really already reaching out. They're looking for ways that they might be able to deal with the addiction or substance abuse or dependence. They're looking for maybe suggestions. This is a much easier stage for you, the individual, to jump in and say, how can I be of help? How can I support you? The person has awareness and insight that there is a problem with what's going on. Again, whether it's gambling or drugs or alcohol, just kind of fill in the blank. And whatever that is, they're more willing to accept your help if they're already seeking it from others. But what about you? So how do you find help if they're looking for it? So this is exactly how I do it. The internet is really your friend when it comes to this. You want to know about what kind of addiction they have because you'll want to put that in your search. So no matter what search engine you use, and I'm not saying you should buy into anything in particular, you'll want to say addiction recovery for Tootsie Rolls. You pick something, okay? And then all types of call centers will pop up, and you have to figure out then what's going to be right for you. What do you think the individual will go for? Do you think they need to be inpatient? Will they like an intensive outpatient? Are they looking for just therapies? Perhaps it's a 12-step group or some kind of other peer support group. Then you'll want to think about, well, what are their means? And so if transportation is an issue and the individual lives, let's say, on the east side of the valley, you're probably not going to want to get them a therapist on the west side of the valley because of transportation issues. But call everyone, and here's why. When you reach out to these call centers, sometimes there won't be anyone there, and you can leave your name and number and they'll call you back at another time. At other times, they'll call you back, or you'll get a hold of an individual, and that particular site or recovery center may not be the best match for your loved one, but the individual there in administration might be able to give you just invaluable information about who can be a good fit for your loved one. Insurance matters, transportation matters, and the needs of what you're trying to accomplish matters, right? For some people, they absolutely need a detox program for 7 days. That's very different from an intensive outpatient program, and you'll want to talk to an admissions coordinator about that. So it does feel like a lot of legwork, and definitely for our patients that have traumatic brain injuries or strokes, sometimes it is a little bit difficult to keep the information organized and keep it in working memory. So being there with them, helping them plan, helping them keep the information organized about who they've already called, who might be a good fit, who takes their insurance, and how they could possibly get there. Maybe it's something near the light rail that's very convenient for them that they can use. All those types of questions are important when you're talking to an admissions coordinator, but this is exactly how I do it when I'm looking for help for my own patients, okay? And then again, leave emails, leave your phone number, and you may have to repeat that process, okay? All right. So the next question I always get is, well, what do I do next? As soon as the individual is safe and in a program, many family members are very curious about, well, what's the next thing I'm going to do and how can we set this up so it's going to be a safe place? So here's 3 simple rules. 1, learn what you can. 2, help but do not enable. And 3, caregivers need support too. Okay? So let's go over them a little bit at a time. Learning as much as you can about a particular addiction can be so important. It can really take away what we call the blame game when it comes to addiction. It's really important to have your friends and family around you, but having professional knowledge can take away that kind of idea that it's all about just a person's willpower or even shaming them into not being able to do better. When in fact we know today that the addiction process does change the way the brain functions. And if you know that, and you know more about the particular substance dependence or addiction that your loved one is going through, you can really kind of refocus your emphasis on how you feel about the individual and the addiction itself, making them separate entities. Loving someone who is addicted is very complicated, and we want to be supportive, but we also want to have good information. There are a lot of online resources that are free. There are many books in the bookstores, and they come in layman's terms too. You don't have to be afraid about this book is just way over my head, unless you like academic journals, and there are plenty of those too, okay? Many times when you talk to an individual like myself, we just want to talk to you and give you a little bit more education about what the individual may be going through and maybe how you can help. We may also give you some jargon words that better help you describe a process of what they're going through, okay? And there's always new in-depth studies going on about how we can better help individuals with an addiction. I want to implore you to get your information from a reputable source. Our friends and family are so supportive and they love to come to our aid, but right now is the time to really get your information from experts and professionals. Unless your aunt's neighbor's son's friend is an addiction professional, this is not the time to just get a bunch of information from people who may or may not have gone through a similar process to you. And if you at home are looking like many of the audiences I've seen before, I see a lot of nods and smiles usually at this point, because we all get a lot of support from our families and friends, and some of it's probably not quite the best information, but we always appreciate the support. Again, lots of free resources. And here, let me just show you a few in this next slide. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration has tons of free resources for persons in recovery and their families. The American Addiction Center actually offers a guide for families. There's the Addiction Education Society that also offers survival tips for loved ones of a person with addiction, and so on and so forth. The brainline.org, who many of you are probably familiar with if you have a loved one with a brain injury, also offers information about substance abuse and traumatic brain injury. One of my favorite sources absolutely go to at all times actually comes from Ohio State University, and I've put the full link on the slides for you. They actually have some workbooks available that are free for downloads, free PDFs about substance abuse and traumatic brain injury. So lots of free resources from professional sources. Don't be afraid to look. There's no shame in it. Okay, next I want to talk to you about the difference between enabling and empowering, and there's a very fine line between the two. As I said before, supporting and loving someone who is in an active addiction can be extremely complicated, and there is a fine line between being able to empower someone and take them to meetings and groups and loving them, and actually having an environment that enables them to continue on in addiction. And I don't just mean someone who allows you to let you use in the house or maybe gives money for gambling. There are lots of ways that we tend to enable. Overlooking poor behavior, it can be as simple as that. But helping that individual means that you have to set very strong boundaries for yourself. And you have to be prepared for that. It's difficult to do. And it may take a little soul searching on your part about exactly how you're going to continue to support that person and set good boundaries. Offer emotional support, but don't enable the addiction. Don't give money for gambling, don't provide alcohol, don't provide drugs, don't provide a place to do drugs. You may actually attend therapies when you go, when the individual is ready to go to a rehab. Some people actually want you to take them to the detox center, and they're going into this extreme moment of change, and it's scary, and they'll need you to be beside them. That's one way to give very good support during this time. Know your limits and don't accept unacceptable behavior. So one of the things is often comes up is like feeling that kindness is taken advantage of. And if you're giving money or finding yourself, covering up the bottles in the recycle bin, and these kinds of feelings are warranted. However, you should be very cautious about if there is violence or abuse, risky behaviors around children or vulnerable people, or even just endangering financial stability, stealing jewelry or money or checkbooks. Okay, those kinds of things are definitely have to be hardline boundaries for you. Okay, number 4. This is the fourth and final piece, and it's probably one of the most important and yet maybe the most unpopular. So let's talk about this. I'm asking you to connect with others and find support for you. Secrecy and shame absolutely fuel addiction for the individual who's struggling with substance abuse or any kind of behavioral addiction. But it can also fuel the struggle for their support people. There is a significant amount of mistrust that goes between family members and caregivers and friends sometimes when an individual is caught up in the throes of addiction. The person who is seeking recovery needs their own supports, but so does the caregiver. And you need a little bit more than family and friends. Family and friends are wonderful, and I want to encourage you to keep those individuals near you who actually can kind of maintain that non-judgmental stance, not the ones who want to bash the individual who's struggling with the addiction, but the ones who are encouraging you to stay strong and to have healthy coping mechanisms yourself. You also don't need toxic positivity. And so let me explain a little bit about what that is. You don't need a cheerleader right now. You don't need the, everything's gonna be great, everything's gonna be fine. Okay, let's get real. This is a struggle. This probably is really causing a lot of emotional upheaval for both the individual who's struggling with the addiction and the family surrounding them or the caregiver surrounding them. So maintaining good boundaries is important. I always encourage peer groups, and what I hear a lot is, I don't have time for that. But peer groups such as Al-Anon or Alateen are important for a reason. One, they're absolutely free. Two, if you have been in the brain injury community for a while, you probably know that peer groups can be absolutely freeing. There is something so non-judgmental and something so relatable about a person who is walking through the same fire that you are, that it's very important to have that kind of same peer support for you. I know that timing can be difficult, and there are a lot of different time zones and ways to connect, just like there would be for the individual seeking support for the addiction. And finally, I usually do recommend private therapy. And it's not because I think there's something wrong with you. I think of it kind of as a coach. Here you are going into this very challenging moment in your life, supporting an individual who is also going through something extremely challenging. And sometimes it's nice to have that extra person in your life who can just kind of be a mirror and give you good feedback. and appropriate good feedback, not just the things that you want to hear, and not just because that they need to do that because they're your friend. It is valuable to have that professional insight, and it's valuable to have that encouragement in appropriate ways. So here's the next thing I usually hear, and you may be even thinking this yourself, but this is not my problem. They're the ones who need to change. So let's go ahead and talk for a minute. Change is not brought about merely by knowledge. I know that the saying is, well, knowing is half the battle. Not true. I wish it was that easy, but it's not. Change requires awareness that something is wrong or that something can be better, insight that the changes need to be made, and then repetitively employing new behaviors for a desired outcome. And change in the family system requires that more than one person actually reflects upon the situation and their role in that dynamic. I know that the addiction is not because of you, or the addictive type behavior is not about you, but if you choose to stay in the individual's life, and many of us do, you too may need to change your behavior in order not to feed into an addictive cycle. So let me tell you a little bit about what that may mean. It may mean something as simple as adjusting our language. Maybe saying things like, I don't like when you bring your drugs into the house, or instead of calling someone an addict. It may be very simple changes. It may be going to therapies with them. It may be that you need to go to family therapy or attend a week of family therapy in an inpatient setting. It may be that the two of you need your own therapy separate or own 12-step groups, something as simple as that, or maybe you need to change living environments. It may be that you have to decide whether you're going to have to now have a dry house to help an individual who can no longer drink, at least for a while. Those things are worth examining about how supportive you want to be to an individual who is struggling with addiction recovery, which can be even more prolific after a brain injury. There are many resources. I usually, when I'm talking to a crowd, I like to reach out and make sure that you feel like you're walking away with something. So again, to reiterate and bring it all home, the way that you are really going to find someone help is understanding, one, what they're addicted to, and two, where they're at in their own terms about getting ready for recovery that they want, where they are at and being able to find help. Two, I want you to educate yourself about addiction. Please look up any professional references that have been provided to you in these PowerPoints. Three, examine your own behavior. Really be ready to empower and support, go to therapies with people, but don't enable bad behaviors or addictive cycles. Don't give money or drugs or a safe haven for, bad behaviors. And then finally, don't be afraid to seek out your own support. I know that the addiction isn't particularly about you, but you are part of the system and you're choosing to be and continue to be part of the system. And that always requires some personal accountability. What part of the system am I? And finally, I'm going to put a list of resources into the PowerPoints that are easier for you to find. I want you to feel like you're walking away with just an easy and accessible list of things you can, websites you can go to. So for drug addiction resources, alcohol abuse resources, national helplines, addiction-related foundations that you might be interested in, different addiction forums that are actually for online, including sober recovery and smart recovery, also free. And then just very specific organizations that are absolutely here in the Valley and nationwide, such as Cocaine's Anonymous, Crystal Meth Anonymous, Heroin Anonymous, Dual Recovery Anonymous, again, Smart Recovery, Families Anonymous, and similar types of groups. And then, of course, there's the national organizations like the Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse. Many of these organizations you can reach out to get different levels of information. Some are very user-friendly, made for the layperson. For those of you who are like heavier reads or more academic literature, there is definitely the National Institute for Drug Abuse, on drug abuse rather, and their mission is to really bring the power of science in mind to and knowledge about addiction. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Stay well, and please, if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out to the Brain Injury Alliance of Arizona. We always have resources and information for you. Thank you so much for your time.